Welcome to the Com Analytics channel. I'm Boris Zinghausen. Today is November 16th, and we have a lot of interesting news ahead. In this episode, attacks on Russian regions are intensifying. How Russians had $1 billion worth of equipment literally destroyed in minutes. Pescov suddenly remembered international law, and meanwhile, Russia is already testing a complete internet shutdown. Why Viktor Orban started calling Russia weak, and what really caused the Trump-Putin meeting to fall through, and how the Americans are pushing Russia out of European markets, quoting down to the last molecule. We'll also talk about this secret mission of American officials to Europe. All this and more will be in today's episode. It's going to be interesting, so if you're new to the channel, subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. So overnight, there were more sanctions from the Magyars, from Ukrainian drone forces, from the GUR, from the SBU, and from the armed forces of Ukraine. So, a refinery in Russia's Samara region was hit, as well as a drone warehouse belonging to the Rubicon unit, a vile Russian unit that causes inconvenience and problems for our troops. And now their warehouse is blown up. Well, the Novorossiysk refinery was hit repeatedly, and finally finished off in the Samara region. By the way, it is one of the main producers of the highest grade fuel for jet engines. In addition, updated information has come in regarding the strike on the Ryazan refinery. There, oil processing units were damaged, which means that this plant is also going out of operation. Well, basically and the armed forces of Ukraine showed footage of how they launched the Bar's jet drones. This is a relatively new development, a drone missile with a flight range of up to 800 kilometers. But that's not all. It turns out that SBU drones destroyed in Novorossiysk, when they hit the port and nearby, 4 S-400 Triumph launchers and 2 important radars. So, the enemy is now short by these 4 launchers and early warning radars, specifically the 96N6 and the 92N6, which are, as you may know, serious target acquisition radars. Well, basically that's it. In total, about 12 S-400 Triumph launchers were stationed on the military base's territory. There's a high probability that the explosion was so powerful that those were damaged as well. By the most conservative estimates, Russia lost almost $1 billion worth of equipment in Novorossiysk. Just imagine, a single strike. The Neptunes came in, as they say. These are, in my opinion, the largest single-time losses of air defense assets, especially when we're talking about the S-400. Now, there are a few important conclusions to draw here. First of all, 2 S-400 divisions and 6 Panzers in the port terminal couldn't save it. Not only were they themselves destroyed and damaged, it begs the question, are these systems really that good, and do they provide the same level of protection, or maybe even worse, on other fronts? Especially if we're talking about Moscow. It's 400 kilometers to Novorossiysk, and to Moscow, well, from the border it's 500. In other words, the stated range of the modernized Neptune missile, 1,000 kilometers, covers that distance. I think that buyers of these Russian air defense systems should seriously reconsider right now. After Iran, this is yet another serious reputational blow to Russian weaponry, specifically to air defense systems. And judging by how our forces keep hitting Russian oil refineries 2 or 3 times until they're completely shut down, there's also plenty left to target in the port of Novorossiysk. And there are now far fewer air defense systems and radars there as well. I mean, they're not going to take air defense systems away from Putin's residences, are they? So you know what I think is going to happen now? It seems to me quite the opposite. They'll start pulling in even more systems from all over the country to Moscow because, you know, the Botox mummy is the most important figure in Russia. So take them from the port, take them from the oil refineries, drag everything over there. I think that's pretty much what's going to happen now. But that's not all. In Volgograd, the Lukoil oil refinery was hit in an attack. Drones again. And this is no ordinary refinery. It processes 15.5 million tons of oil per year. It's a key fuel hub for the south of the Russian Federation. That's almost 6% of the country's total refining capacity. So overall, it's an excellent target as well. Every night, Russian oil refineries are being hit, sometimes more than one, like today. They're put out of commission, then finished off later. Samara, Ryazan, Volgograd, Novorossiysk, Crimea, the explosion on the Trans-Siberian Railway I mentioned yesterday. And that's just in the last few days. Moreover, the number, quality, and range of the strikes are only increasing. In other words, even missiles have now reached a key port. Of course, naturally, the ghouls are also striking us from the swamps, but before, they did it almost with impunity, and nothing ever flew back at Russia in response. But now, you want bars, you want Luti, you want Neptune, whatever you want, you get it. Just yesterday, by the way, we were talking about how the Russian Foreign Ministry was outraged by the US operation in the Caribbean, and now Putin's entire press secretary Pescov has decided to comment on it. And Pescov expressed hope that the operation the United States is launching in the Caribbean, called Southern Spear, it recently got this name, will be carried out in accordance with international law as they hope in Russia. And I quote, "We hope that no actions will be taken that could lead to destabilization in the Caribbean region and around Venezuela, and that everything will be in accordance with international law," Peskov stated. At the same time, he noted that international law is currently in a deplorable state in many parts of the world. Simply phenomenal. According to which norms of international law did Russia attack Ukraine and continue to kill innocent civilians here? Seriously, what are you even talking about when it comes to international law? You should have just kept quiet. Why does Russia even open its mouth on the topic of international law? But as soon as something happens to one of their friends from the dictator club, Moscow immediately starts shouting about international law and suddenly remembers the UN. See how it goes? Friends, let me remind you, we're at the finish line of a big important fundraiser. I think today we'll be able to close it for the 1st Medical Battalion for our combat medics. They have a very serious need for ventilators, and we're raising funds specifically for them, but now for a second Falco 220 Evo ventilator for the frontline surgical group of the 1st Separate Medical Battalion. Our medics have recorded a video. This is an appeal to all of us. Please listen.
Апарат штучної вентиляції легень – незамінна річ для надання невідкладної допомоги в умовах бойових дій. Ми в першому окремому медичному батальйоні використовуємо спеціальні портативні системи забезпечення для використання у військових умовах. Це найкращий інструмент, але, на жаль, він не призначений для такого навантаження та роботи в безперебійному режимі, яка є в наших умовах зараз. Тому ці системи починають виходити з ладу. Через це ми потребуємо додаткових звичайних стаціонарних апаратів ШВЛ. Залишитися без них не можна, адже це призведе до серйозних наслідків. Вартість одного апарату – 730 тисяч гривень, а всього потреба є у 8. Разом з каналом Бориса Тізенгаузена збираємо на другий ШВЛ для передових хірургічних груп першого окремого медичного батальйону часу обмаль. Розраховуємо на вашу підтримку.
Let's support our medics, our guardian angels who risk their lives and save the lives of our defenders. The link to donate is in the description of this video. There are options for Mono, Private, and PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. And to each of you, I say a huge thank you for helping Ukraine, for supporting our defenders, and for supporting our combat medics. If for some reason you don't see the payment details, or if you're watching on another channel, here's a QR code. It also leads to the donation page. And then something unexpected happened. Well, unexpected, but in a normal civilized world, this is exactly how it should always be. A former commander of the neo-Nazi assault group, Rostec, has been sentenced to life in prison in Finland for war crimes committed in Ukraine. It's very telling that there is absolutely no tolerance for these ghouls and murderers who came to Ukrainian soil. So a court in Finland sentenced the Russian citizen Jan Petrovsky, who now goes by a new name, Vaislav Torden. He was sentenced to life imprisonment after being found guilty of committing war crimes in Ukraine in 2014 and 2015. This individual was accused of committing 5 such crimes connected to the activities of the sabotage and assault reconnaissance group Rostec, which in 2014 took part in battles on the side of these separatists. Although there was only a handful of those separatists, for the most part, it was militants like these who had come from Russia. Those who came with Gherkin, those who came with these Rostec guys. In short, they caught him, this character. And I remember the year 2014. Remember all those stories about some kind of militiamen, how Putin used to say there was some sort of people's resistance? They bought their uniforms at the army surplus store. Tanks too, apparently, and so on and so forth. The Buk missile system, by the way, the one used to shoot down flight MH17, was probably bought at the army surplus store too, it seems. Well, anyway, later that same Strelkov, Gherkin, admitted that it was actually Russian troops entered Donbass, he became the trigger for the war, and so on. Although we already know this, of course. Putin also lied about those little green men in Crimea. It wasn't us, it was some militia, some self-defense force. And then he admitted that they were Russian soldiers. He always lies. A vile, disgusting frog-like creature, that's what he is. By the way, this VI, Slava, who he was sentenced to life, they caught him in Helsinki, he was flying to Nice, and he had a residence permit in Finland. For some reason, Russian patriots, real Rusik, just don't like living in their homeland. Well, respect to the Finns, of course. By the way, for all these participants in the war, or the so-called special military operation as they call it, I believe there should be a total ban on visiting normal civilized countries. Let them travel to North Korea instead. I think Western intelligence agencies definitely have a database of who signed contracts, who fought, and so on. If not, then the Ukrainian intelligence service can definitely share. Although I have a feeling that the balding muskrat will do what he always does. He'll grab a few Finnish citizens in Russia under some made-up pretext, and then try to bargain for an exchange. Remember how he always does that? And this brings up the question, should citizens of Western countries even visit the Russian Federation at all? And then I came across a few videos. This topic of disconnecting the internet is making the rounds. They're starting to do street interviews, and some militant Putin supporters are getting upset. This wasn't part of the deal. They get that there's a war, but why cut off the internet? And it turns out a huge number of problems have surfaced there with the shutdown of mobile internet. For example, equipment in the fields that relies on navigation or some kind of connectivity just doesn't work. Parents can't monitor their children through special apps anymore. In general, a lot of these unpleasant issues came up, and I came across videos of Russians being asked on the streets about not just mobile internet being cut off, but all internet. Even wired internet. So there was a very typical response, and as for young people, they mostly had two types of answers. I'm not going to comment on that, so I don't get in trouble later. Or they start talking about the Constitution, those who are braver, about freedom of speech. That's just not how it's done. And as for the older generation, it's just something else entirely. I specifically took the time to write down how one lady reacted to the situation. She thoughtfully said, after a brief pause, "We'll still find out some news from the TV." Her words seemed to offer a sense of reassurance. And if we need to know something important, then they'll let us know. Everything we need to know, and we don't need to know any more than that. God, what a truly slavish mentality this is. And then there's this idiotic opposition that always pops up. You know, when people point out blatantly obvious rights, and now it's the 4th year after the full-scale invasion, do you really think this is how the war was supposed to go? Is this what Putin had in mind? And what do they say in response? Well, they say the Kremlin knows better from up there. They know better what to do. We're just little people, and meanwhile, even wired internet is having problems in Russia. Now, they're saying that some kind of accident happened. No, there was no accident at all. People in Kostroma, Yaroslavl, Ivanovo, Vladimir, Murmansk regions, and Krasnodar Krai are all reporting massive issues. It turns out you can only access websites from the Ministry of Digital Development's whitelist. But that's not how an accident works, you see? In that case, you wouldn't be able to open anything, not just certain sites from a whitelist. Well, of course, Rostelecom said it was a technical malfunction. They're testing a complete shutdown. It's a rehearsal. So what does this mean? They're checking how the population reacts when everything is completely shut off, the resilience of the systems, the level of panic, and so on. People probably won't protest too much. And mobile internet, that's the same thing. You can't use the terminal, can't pay through the terminal, and so on. Now you have to carry cash with you. Those times are coming. By the way, Putin has worthy teachers. Just a month ago, in Afghanistan, the Taliban ordered a complete shutdown of the internet and mobile communications. Though, it's still a question of who is teaching whom. The Taliban said it was being done to ensure morality. The shutdown happened in stages. It caused serious disruptions in the work of government institutions, businesses, and everyday life. Imagine, they completely shut down both the internet and mobile communications. For many women in Afghanistan, this was their last opportunity to work, communicate, and earn a living. They can't leave their homes, can't work, can't get an education, and now it's been cut off. Iran too, by the way. This is a system where a country localizes its own internal internet. It's called the internet, meaning like in North Korea, when it's encapsulated, only permitted sites are accessible, and there's no access to the outside. You basically need a note from the Politburo to go online. That's how it is, and Iran is also creating this kind of internet system. Starlink terminals have been banned, and there's provider-level blocking of undesirable content. They even had patrols going around, patrols that triangulated and searched for Starlink terminals because that's free access. You can upload something there. You can transmit information from inside, reveal the truth. So in North Korea, there's such a system. I talked about it before. It's called Quanmen in one of the previous episodes. So, welcome to the club of dictators. No internet, the Soviet Union at its worst, the Iron Curtain, the Gulag. It's just amazing how a handful of senile KGB men managed to run things into the ground. It's truly astonishing. And soon, on the permitted websites, these whitelisted sites, inside the encapsulated Russian internet, there will be nothing but endless victories. Record-breaking pig iron production, winter crops, and so on. Putin has defeated everyone. Putin is eternally alive, our leader, our helmsman, and so on. Of course, abroad, everything will be terrible on this internet. In the traditions of Soviet propaganda, and also in New York, African Americans are eating pigeons out of hunger. That's what it's all going to be. That's exactly where things are heading now. And at an accelerated pace, too. The ability for Roskomnadzor to disconnect things like this, to have the full right to shut things off, will already be in place starting in March. There's not much time left until next month. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. A bit of calm analysis in our turbulent times, you have to admit, wouldn't hurt. It's also good for falling asleep. If you don't speed up my speech, it can help you drift off. So, subscribe. This channel has a lot of useful features. NATO and the EU's fear of a Russian attack is laughable, says Hungarian Prime Minister Orban. He's really a jack of all trades. He's just churning out these interviews right now. One statement after another. He asked Trump for a delay on oil. He ran over there. He made a statement here. Look, here's a new thesis. Very interesting. Let's dissect it and find out who this Danube spleen is really working for. He believes that Russia won't attack. We already know that because it's not strong enough. Russia won't attack because it's not strong enough. That's the military aspect. Europe's economic and human potential far exceeds that of Russia. That's what Orban says. Russia isn't strong enough, it's weak. For more than 3 years now, the Russians haven't been able to fully occupy Ukraine. How can we in Europe claim that we are weaker than Russia? Orban said this on a German podcast. Here, the question is something else. The difference lies in the attitude toward the life of a person and a citizen of one's own country. I have no doubt, none at all, that Putin is ready to sacrifice another million Russians for some elusive goal of his. But are NATO countries ready to sacrifice 1 million of their own citizens? Do you understand the difference? That is, the value of human life, the attitude toward it. In Russia, Putin offered money there. Families would push out their fathers, children, brothers, forcing them to go and sign contracts, and they were even happy if he died there, because then the whole family would get money and their problems would be solved right away. Do you understand how they treated it there? That's the difference. So, are they, for example, ready to exchange strikes on cities? I don't think so. And polls show that, well, people will react differently if Russia attacks. That's why Orban is being very, very cunning here. This is a new narrative, that Putin won't attack, that Russia is weak. It emerged when NATO countries started spending much more on defense. In other words, Putin realized that he had provoked an unprecedented arms race. And in this situation, things definitely won't work out in his favor, especially from an economic point of view. So, downplaying imperial ambitions, Putin's aggression, reassuring Europe that there's no need to worry, that Putin won't attack. Trying to measure Putin by rational metrics is a hopeless endeavor. If he were evaluating the situation rationally, he would have gotten out of this war long ago. He wouldn't have even started it. Realizing that he wouldn't even come close to achieving any significant results, the fact is, after this shameful war, he'll need some kind of small victorious one. The 1.5-meter tall conqueror will definitely want to leave as a winner. So who will he want to fight then? Good question. Unfortunately, the first ones at risk are naturally the neighbors of the Russian Federation. And then there are these fairy tales from Orban about the kind-hearted grandpa Putin. They're aimed at reducing aid to Ukraine. Basically, Orban doesn't even hide it. But why? Why wouldn't he attack? Let's just wrap this all up already. Putin won't attack us, he's weak. Let's start buying his oil again, we'll sort it all out now. And that's what this is about too. And Orban also made a very interesting statement that if a nuclear power loses a conventional war, he is absolutely certain that the nuclear risk ends up on the table. Putin's and officials' tales about the mighty Poseidon and Burevestnik didn't really impress Europe or the US. And Orban decided to add a bit more nuclear drama to the picture. But Putin has already lost this war. That's it. That's all there is to it. That's the end of it. So he'll come out of this with either a smaller piece of land clenched in his blackened teeth or a larger piece of this scorched Ukrainian earth. At this point, it makes no difference. He has already lost this war, so he'll need another one. And so this so-called interpreter of Putin, the hypnotist Orban, is telling you that he's not dangerous. On the contrary, he's very dangerous, driving him into this arms race for the Blue Forest. Well, that's where he'll die.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
The meeting between Putin and Trump has been postponed for now, but contacts on this matter are ongoing. Putin's aide Ushakov said that the agreements reached in Anchorage are a good path toward achieving a peaceful settlement. The results of the summit have been communicated to the Ukrainian side. The results of Anchorage don't please those who want to continue the war. What results? Where are these results anyway? What agreements? Trump left early before the meeting was even over. There was no joint statement at all. There was nothing at all. All anyone remembers are the grimaces and antics of this one, the bold chupacabra. That's it. There was nothing else in Anchorage. And honestly, I think Trump has other things on his mind right now. Those Epstein letters in Venezuela are just adding fuel to the fire for him. They just keep publishing them over and over. It's just total chaos going on there. Well, I think soon they'll figure out what's true and what's not. Well, of course, yeah. Here's another opinion. Russians missed an important opportunity. The meeting in Budapest. This was reported by the president of Finland, Alexander Stubb, and he says that the decision to cancel the Trump-Putin meeting was made after a phone conversation between Rubio and Lavrov. And it seems like Lavrov has really lost his grip. He could have just talked nonsense after all. Lying is the main skill of Russian officials. That's what they're taught from the very beginning. He could have lied. But apparently, Rubio, with some leading questions, got Lavrov to admit that Russia isn't planning to go anywhere and isn't going to make any concessions. That's why it was done in a rather tough manner. And Rubio conveyed this to Donald Trump. But Lavrov, just a couple of days ago, said that the meeting fell through because someone was giving Trump behind-the-scenes reports. So it turns out Lavrov also threw quite a heavy stone at Rubio, implying that Rubio is distorting the facts and reporting things to Donald Trump in a misleading way. Lavrov has been losing his composure lately. He botched such an important conversation. Honestly, he used to lie much more convincingly. Well, it seems that Putin doesn't change horses midstream, so Lavrov keeps his job, even though there were rumors that they wanted to get rid of him. Well, here's our segment. Donald, we were getting along just fine. The US is pushing Belgrade to completely sever its energy ties with Moscow. That is, Serbia's Minister of Energy, Dubravka Đedović-Handanović, stated that Washington, for the first time, openly and explicitly demanded the complete withdrawal of Russian entities from the state oil company. This would then serve as the basis for lifting the sanctions that were imposed on this company, and yes, at the beginning of 2025. As Jedovich Handanovic stated, the American position is now formulated without any ambiguity. What's going on? What's happening? And furthermore, the US has decided to remove Russian gas from Europe down to the last molecule. US officials have been traveling to European countries to promote American energy resources instead of Russian ones. This is reported by the Financial Times, citing its sources. In general, Russia is already selling oil at huge discounts. The price is approaching, sales are getting close to cost price, especially if you factor in transportation expenses. The US is pushing Russia out of European markets. They are imposing sanctions against Lukoil and Rosneft. Lukoil will now be completely forced out of European markets. They are selling off their assets there. By the end of the year, the hole in the Russian budget will be close to 10 trillion. And things are going so well that Putin has even decided to shut off the internet for Russians. So they won't hear about all this, won't read about it, won't watch Tizenhausen. Am I understanding the situation correctly? Everything is going according to plan, so let's turn off the internet. So we poor, unfortunate Russians are being kicked out from everywhere. What can we do about it, huh? This is how the war is supposed to end. That was probably Putin's goal all along. The old senile man in the Kremlin listens to reports from his officials about how, in Russia, they want to be the first to introduce facial payment. With what face, when you soon won't even have internet? Where are you even going to use facial payment anyway? Although all of this was invented a long time ago, but Putin doesn't even use the internet or a mobile phone. So you can just feed any kind of nonsense to the old man Kabaev and say, we just need a few more billion for this. We'll come up with, something like, well, a potato like this. Sliced like this and it'll be fried and crispy. No one else in the world has thought of it, but we have. Just give us 3 billion, please. That's how it goes. And this balding plague sits there, started a war and has no idea what's going on around her, built herself 3 identical bunkers and hides, moving from one to another. In short, something needs to be done. Of course, the world needs to get rid of this filth. Friends, take care of yourselves and your loved ones and subscribe to the channel. And I really ask you, let's support our combat medics. They are truly wonderful people, amazing, outstanding, and highly professional. Let me remind you, the details are in the description of this video. Wishing us all a peaceful day and glory to Ukraine.